welcome to the project management video. In today's lesson, what we will learn, the first thing we have is how to define the network diagram, or what is the definition of the network diagram. The second thing we will learn from this video is how to create the network diagram. And the third thing we have is how to determine the critical path from the network diagram. So that is the today's agenda on this video. Okay, so what is a project network diagram? So basically it is a diagram which displays the sequence of activities or the sequence of tasks based on how they will be performed or based on how they will be executed. So that is what is the basic definition of the project network diagram. Then what is the critical path? The critical path is the longest path in the network diagram that shows how long your project will take. So if the duration of the critical path is 35 days, which means that is how long your project will take. And the critical path can only be determined if you have the project network diagram. So the project network diagram, the first thing we need to have the activities or the tasks. And once you have the activities, you need to determine the dependencies among those activities, and we need to find out that which activity depends on which one. So we can say, in other words, for example, if you want to paint a room, you need to first purchase the paint, or you need to first hire the painter. So we can say that the activity that is to paint the room, it depends on purchase of paint. So that is the dependency among these two activities. Again, the network diagram, it shows the sequenced order of the activities in a project based on the dependencies that we have. So once you have the network diagram, then we can proceed further to determine the critical path. And the critical path basically shows you the duration of the whole project. So once the network diagram is ready, along with the duration of each activity, we can then find out what is the critical path of the project. For example, that is how the network diagram may look like. You have different activities here, A, B, C, D, E, and each activity has its own duration. Once you know the dependencies, you can simply create this network diagram. And once you have the network diagram, we can find out what is the critical path. And based on the critical path, we can find out the project duration as well. Now we will see how we can create the network diagram based on the activity information. For example, here we have different activities, activity A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So that is the first thing we need to have. In the second column, we have the dependencies, that which activity depends on which one. And in the third column, we have the duration for these activities. So for example, activity A does not depend on any activity and has a duration of 5 days. Activity B and C both depends on activity A, which means activity B and C can only be started once you have finished activity A. And again, we are using the relationship finish to start, which means you have to finish your current activity, only then you can start the next activity. Then activity D depends on B, E depends on activity D, activity F depends on E and C, which means F can only be started once you have finished both E and C. And activity G depends on activity F, and then we have the duration for these activities. Now it is really important to determine the critical path if you need to know how long your project will take. For example, if we use some other approach which is not the correct approach to determine the duration of your project. For example, here in the third column, we have the duration for each activity. If we just take the total of these activities, we will get the total of 36 days, which means that is wrong. That is not the correct duration of your project. That is not how long your project will take. Again, if you need to know how long your project will take, you must have to determine the critical path, and that is only possible if you have the network diagram. So based on these three columns, we will see how we can develop the network diagram and how we can determine the critical path. So that is how the network diagram will look like. Activity A, it will take 5 days. Then you have activity B and C after you have finished the activity A. Then you have activity D once you have finished activity B. After D you have activity E. Then after activity E you have activity F, which will take 6 days. And we can see here that activity F can only be started once you have finished both activity C and E. After that you have activity G, which will take 5 days, and that is the end of our project. So we can see here in our network diagram, if you just know the dependencies and the relationships, we can simply create the network diagram. We can just put the activities in the right order. So we can see here that the first activity we have is activity A, which will take 5 days. Then once A has been finished, you will start activity B and C in parallel. After activity B you have activity D. After D you have activity E. Then once E and C will be finished, you have activity F, and then you have activity G. And on top of each activity you can see the duration for each activity. Once you have that information, then we can find out that how many different paths we have, and then we will determine which one is the critical path. Now the first path we have is from A, B, D, E, F and G. So that is the first path we have in our network diagram. So we can just see that information. So that is the path number 1, and if we just add up the durations for all of these activities, you will get the total of 29 days. That is the duration of the path number 1. Then the second path we have is A, C, F and G. So that is the second path we have, and the duration of this path is 23 days. Again, based on the definition of the critical path, so the critical path is the longest path in the network diagram in terms of duration, not in terms of number of activities. So based on that definition, the longest path we have is path number 1, which is having the duration of 29 days, and that is what is the critical path of your project, which means that is how long your project will take, which is 29 days. And the activities which is on this path are called the critical activities. So that is how we can determine what is the critical path of your project, and that is how long your project will take. Thank you for watching the video, and don't forget to visit our Facebook page for some more information about the project management trainings and the PMP exam preparation. Thank you.